In a surprise offensive, rebel groups in Syria have gained massive grounds. They have achieved the biggest change in the dynamics of the war in many, many years. The second biggest city of Syria, Aleppo, was taken barely without a fight. Now the city of Hama is seriously under pressure, and Assad is in existential danger. His government, it might actually fall. How has that happened? What has happened? Who are the rebels? And what does that mean for Assad and for the Russians? We'll talk about all of this in this video about the current developments in Syria. On the 27th of November, several rebel groups started a surprise offensive in Syria. They used VBIEDs, so vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, basically suicide bombers in cars, to break the frontal positions of the Syrian forces, and then their ground forces spread through that and started a war of movement, gaining massive ground. The offensive was led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the rebel group there, but other rebel groups joined in as well. We'll talk about who they are and their ideology somewhat later. Let's just call them rebel groups, even though several of them are internationally recognized terrorist groups. This offensive was started as retaliation against increased shelling of civilians by the Syrian Arab Army, and they have achieved massive territorial gains. As we can see here, this was the initial line, and they have advanced in all of this here against the Syrian government-controlled area. Other groups have also started movement. They are using the dynamics of the current situation to improve their own position. Among that, the SNA, the Syrian National Army, is also advancing towards the Syrian Democratic Forces. We'll talk about all of them in a moment. Those are the Turkish-backed SNA against the Kurdish US-backed SDF. They are advancing here as well. Right now, the SDF, which has also advanced here south and into Aleppo, there are very little fighting. This implies that there's very little fighting, which implies that there was an agreement between the SDF and the SNA, but there are also there's also video evidence of casualties and of prisoners of war that were taken. The situation right now is unclear. It seems to be that there has been made some agreement to only fight Assad, as now the Kurdish-led SDF seems to be withdrawing and handing over territory to the SNA. Right now, there's also the claim that the rebels said that the YPJ, which is leading the SDF, that they are getting free passage to withdraw to areas held by them here in yellow, if they leave this area here. The offensive was likely in a direct connection with the war in southern Lebanon, as Israel and Hezbollah have announced a ceasefire, and basically the moment the ceasefire came into effect, the offensive here started. It's clearly in a connection, as Hezbollah previously has been one of the pillars to maintain Assad in power. Now they have suffered massive casualties. They had decapitation strikes, and the rebels clearly wanted to use the window of opportunity before Hezbollah can reorganize and help Assad again. The advances have been massive, but there has also already been a lot of war crimes. Videos show the execution of Assad soldiers by the rebel groups, and the Syrian Air Force has started, among others, with barrel bombs that have killed civilians here. But let's talk about the factions that play a role here, and I found this graphic, and it's actually that chaotic, but this should help to keep some overview. Now, the offensive was led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. They are Islamists. They are basically al-Nusra, the al-Nusra Front that was allied with Al-Qaeda. They have renamed themselves, tried to get a more moderate image, but they are still considered to be a terrorist organization by most nations worldwide. They still have foreign volunteers fighting for them, foreign Islamists, but for now they claim they do not aim for international jihad, and I haven't heard of them doing any international jihad outside of Syria. Their leader, al-Jolani, is still wanted by the United States with a bounty of $10 million. He was previously the leader of the al-Nusra Front as well, so he was leading Islamist groups before. Now he's acting like he has become more moderate, trying to allow to open an opportunity to negotiate with him. Now, for instance, he has publicly said that the Christians are left to be left alone, and that civilians are to be left alone, and their property has to be left alone. But he's supported by Qatar and Saudi Arabia, as well as wealthy Arab individuals. They support HTS, but effectively they are also protected by Turkey, as Turkish troops are in Idlib, the power base of HTS, and thus for the Syrian Arab army and the Russians to engage them, they would have to engage territory held by Turkey, and thus the Turkish armed forces were basically protecting HTS. Still, though, to call them allies would be would be a stretch. What is a Turkish ally is the Syrian National Army. They are those groups here. They are basically a Turkish proxy force by now. Turkey is training them, is equipping them. They are also Islamists, so not much difference in this regard. Turkey is also using them for its own usage. For instance, in Libya, they sent SNA fighters to fight on the side allied with Turkey, with Erdogan, and SNA fighters have also fought in the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2020, where they fought on the Azerbaijani side. Turkey is allied to Azerbaijan, so basically helping an ally of Turkey against the Armenians here. They are fighting the Kurds and the central government. The Kurds, they are fighting because Turkey doesn't want the Kurds to play a politically important role in Syria. The Kurds are mostly the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces. They are led by the Kurdish, by the YPJ. Those are those here. But they are not just Kurds. There are Arabs among them too. The ideology there is not Islamist, but secular socialistic. They are supposedly democratic. They have some democratic resemblance here, even though their human rights records is not spotless either. But if there is anyone resembling closely or somewhat roughly a good guy, you could probably say that they try to be that guy. The US is supporting the YPJ and the SDF here, but the YPJ is aligned with Öcalan, Abdullah Öcalan, and the PKK, and the PKK is a terrorist organization in Turkey for the Kurdish forces. It's the Kurdish the Kurdish terrorist organization inside of Turkey. That's one of the reasons why Turkey is against the YPJ, because they are part of Öcalan's network. Abdullah Öcalan is sitting in prison in Turkey for life because of the terrorism of the PKK, him being the leader of it. So very complicated. YPJ among them has also female units where women are fighting, as with their socialist ideology they are less aligned to Islam and thus allow women to play an equal role in society. Their aim is to gain autonomy inside of Syria, especially the area in yellow here. This is majority Kurdish settlement, and there they want to take control over their own future. Right now they basically have autonomy. Still they are allied with Assad. Among the reasons of them are Turkish attacks on them and attacks by the SNA. As I said, Turkey doesn't want the YPJ and the SDF to play a role in a future Syria. They don't want them to create an autonomous region there, as they see them directly connected to the terrorist organization of the PKK, and as they are afraid of the Kurds in Turkey then becoming more secessionist if a Kurdish state is developing south across the southern border, especially one hostile to the government in Ankara. So very complicated. Turkey itself intervened here in several times. This area here, for instance, was controlled by the YPJ, but the Turkish armed forces pushed them back here, captured that territory. They also invaded here in the north and pushed the Kurds away. So Turkey is actively, in the past, has actively engaged the SDF and the YPJ here in this region. So this is part of the faction, but we are not done yet. We have the Syrian Arab Army. This is Bashar al-Assad's forces. They are the best equipped, but currently clearly demoralized. While they might have the best equipment, they have the Air Force, they have the most armored fighting vehicles, they have the Navy. Still, though, they are clearly demoralized. This is another part. Hezbollah was propping up Assad and helping him survive, and then helping him reconquer territory. They are controlled, directly aligned with Iran. And Hezbollah was important to keep Assad in power and to strengthen his position. Now, though, they have been really, really weakened by Israel through the decapitation strikes. They also withdrew their fighters into Lebanon to fight Israel there, where they've suffered heavy losses and are disorganized now. They might obviously reorganize, and this is one of the reasons why I think it's in a direct connection to the ceasefire, as the rebels saw either now or never. If we give Hezbollah time to reorganize, then they will be able to hold us back once again. So rather start the operation now. Now let's go to Iran, who is directly connected to Hezbollah, obviously. They are also supporting Bashar al-Assad, because Bashar al-Assad is an Alawite, and Alawites are a sect of the Shiites. Shiites are the majority in Iran and are having the government there. They are the government there, the Shiites. Syria, on the other hand, has a Sunni majority. So should Bashar al-Assad, who is allied with Iran and who is as an Alawite is considered to be a Shiite, should he fall, then the new government will likely be Sunni and thus be opposed to Iran. This is why Iran wants to keep him in power by all means. They have recruited militias in Syria. They've sent the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps to help Assad, and they've recruited militias in Iraq and even in Afghanistan among the Hazara people there, who are Shiites as well, to help Assad fight the civil war propped up by Iran here. Right now, they're one of their proxy groups, Shiite militias from Iraq that are supported by Iran, supposedly have already crossed the border and are on their way to the front line to help Iran keep Assad in power. We need to talk about Turkey. They wanted to depose Assad. They want to prevent a Kurdish state from building, as I've already said, but they also want to have as few refugees, Syrian refugees, as possible in Turkey, as they have become a real burden for Turkey itself. One of the ways to achieve that was to take control over parts of Syrian territory with their own forces, and thus to be able to resettle Syrians in Syria, but in an area that's not controlled by Assad, basically taking away the excuse or the justification for the refugees by telling them, well, you can go home now, it's safe there. So this was one of the means of the Turkish involvement. The Turkish government also wanted to depose of Assad, but they have agreed to not do that, or accepted not to do that, in the Astana Agreement. In the Astana Agreement, about Syria, Turkey, Russia, and Iran basically carved up the country into spheres of influence, allowing Turkey to stay inside of Syria, inside another sovereign country, but at a price of basically Turkey accepting Assad to stay in power. Bashar al-Assad and Russia reneged on that agreement to a certain degree by supporting a government offensive into area being considered to be under the Turkish influence, and Turkey was not able to stop this as due to direct Russian involvement there. This was obviously an embarrassment to Turkey, and now it seems like Erdogan is taking his revenge, as this offensive by the rebels can't have been without the knowledge of the intelligence agencies of the Turkish armed forces, as they have their presence inside of Idlib, where HTS was building up its forces, was planning, was practicing. It must have been with the knowledge of the Turkish government that the HTS and other rebel groups want to do an offensive. It might even have happened with Turkish aid. Now Aleppo is captured. This has never happened before in the civil war. Parts of Aleppo were held by rebels, but parts were always under government control. Now it has fallen in a lightning offensive. This is an absolute embarrassment to the government, and the rebels are now in front of Hama. Hama is important in the south. They have withdrawn yesterday. Now they are attacking again. Supposedly they had overstretched their supply lines. Currently, there's another renewed offensive going on in the direction of Hama. Should Hama and then Homs fall, then Latakia here this area here is cut off from Damascus. As you can see, with the loss of the north, the only two lines of communication from Damascus into the area here of Latakia are through Homs and Hama. Should it fall, then the Alawites are cut off from the main power base. As said, Assad is an Alawite, and this is his heartland. This is where the families, where the clans of his supporters, of the militias that support him, of a lot of the military that supports him, this is where they are. And should the Sunnis, should the Sunni rebels threaten Homs, we can expect a dissolution of the militias and of the Syrian armed forces, as they will look to protect their homeland from the Sunnis, as they will look to protect their families from the rebels, and thus will give up their positions inside of the militaries. Should Homs fall, then we have to say this is likely the end of Assad if they advance to this. And as we can see, they are like 40-50 kilometers away from Homs, so they are having a strategic victory in front of them. The rebels have not just taken territory, as we can see here. They have not just taken territory, they also captured a lot of material. Numerous MBTs, numerous IFVs have been captured. They also took a lot of prisoners. This shows how low the morale has been on the Syrian Arab forces, how completely overwhelmed they've been. They have advanced in various directions, but not just HTS and the SNS, Syrian National Army, but also the SDF, which was previously allied with Assad. We see them advancing here, southwest, and from their northern enclave, they have advanced into Aleppo, clearly, at my mind, aiming to reconnect their held territory at the cost of the Assad regime, as probably the soldiers here were withdrawing at the same time. Right now, it seems they're handing over the territory in the west, though, as some agreement must have been made to give the territory here. Likely the withdrawal of the SDF has been agreed to. Interesting part too, rebels are showing blue and yellow armbands and headbands. This is being sold as a sign of support for Ukraine, as both are fighting on the same side. Basically, the Ukraine is fighting Russia directly, whereas the rebels are fighting an ally of Russia that is being supported by directly. This can be a reasonable explanation. Obviously, the initial reaction was that this is probably a sign by the GUR, by the Ukrainian military intelligence. For now, we do not have proof that the GOR has been involved, but we have to say it would be reasonable and very effective if it was. Very few special forces can multiply the combat forces of a rebel force by training them, by leading them, by giving them intelligence and training them tactically, by giving them staff advice, how to conduct operations, and by handing over high-value items like night vision goggles. The effect of just 10 to 20 special forces soldiers in a context like this can be extraordinary, and we have to say it can be much, much bigger than using those 10 to 20 soldiers inside of Ukraine itself. We've already seen that in the past in Sudan, where Ukrainian special forces have helped the forces fighting have helped the government army against the rapid support forces that were supported by Russia initially. And we have seen here, we've also seen that in Mali, where a convoy from previous Wagner fighters from the Russian Africa Corps was wiped out by Tuareg rebels, and in their victory picture there were two white guys among them, likely Ukrainian special forces that have led that. In this example in Mali, 80 Russian fighters have been killed, and the expense for the Ukrainians was sending a couple of men there, which shows the extraordinary effect. For Russia, this means that they either have to give up their influence in certain areas, or they have to send reinforcements, which then can't be used in Ukraine. So for Ukraine, this is a return of investment like hardly anything else. So, and that makes it likely for the Ukrainians to be involved in this too, even though there is no proof. Then we need to talk about Assad. He's in Russia right now, according to reports. Supposedly he fled there. Officially, there are talks, bilateral talks. He has now announced a counteroffensive and the reconquest of the area, but we have to say he's clearly weakened, and he's weakened like he hasn't been for a long, long time. His troops are demoralized right now. His supporters are weakened, and should Hamaim's horns fall, then his whole army will likely disintegrate. What does it mean for Russia? Well, Russia can probably help with its air force. The Russian planes have already flown some air attacks and caused civilian casualties. But apart from sending some planes, Russia can't really do much. They might be able to spare a few planes, but their soldiers they need in Ukraine. So what can they send to help Assad? Should the government fall, should the Assad government fall, then the Russian bases in Latakia will be lost. Right now, the Russians have in Tartus a naval base, and they have the air force in Khmymin. This is the biggest Russian Air Force base in Syria, and the basis of power for the Russians. Supposedly, there are claims that the Russians have already withdrawn from several bases and focused their forces on Latakia. The video to prove that is worthless, though, as it shows Syrian tanks in my mind. So I can't confirm it as of yet that the Russians are already giving up the majority of the country to the rebels at this point, even though there is a video of a Russian flag being lowered showing that apparently at least one forward operating base operated by the Russians was already captured by the rebels. The Turkish government is clearly profiting from the current situation. Their rebels, their aligned rebels, have had massive successes. Assad is weakened as he hasn't been in a long, long time. His government, his rule is seriously threatened, and the Turkish aligned rebels are currently advancing. We'll have to see if the Iranian militias, the Iraqi militias that are supported by Iran will be able to stem the tide, will be able to stop the rebels, whether Hezbollah and Iran can mobilize enough to help Assad. But as of now, Assad is in serious danger of being toppled and of losing his army if Hama and Homs are falling. We see the biggest development in the Syrian civil war for many, many years. If you don't want to miss future developments here, then I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. And leave a comment. What do you think? Will Assad be able to stay in power despite all of this once again? If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.